today. So I'm going to just bring in my guests here. So today we're talking about online proctoring, maintaining business as usual, and I'm joined by a couple of guests that you can ask questions at any point. So you should be able to see a little questions board on the display, so if you do want to ask questions. But welcome Amanda and Janet. Can you hear me, guys? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. The technology works. Excellent. We're going to take you through a bit of a kind of walk through online proctoring, some examples in the form of the work that Janet's been doing with the Association of Corporate Treasurers, and we're also going to be looking at the situation stateside in North America with Amanda and her experience. So I suppose my first question to my guests is, well, do you want to just briefly introduce yourselves? Janet, do you want to go first? Tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yes, sure. So hi everyone, I'm Janet Legge, Director of Awarding Body at the ACT. I've been working there for nearly 3 years, and actually the reason I was brought to the ACT was to help try and sort out so there we go, sorry, just sorted my camera out. So the reason I was brought there was actually to try and help them resolve some issues they were experiencing with online assessment and remote invigilation. But my background has very much been in the education sector, working for City and Guilds and Pearson for the previous sort of 10 years.
Excellent, excellent. And Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Dainis. I am the CEO and lead psychometrician for Dainis and Company here in the States, based out of Virginia. I have been a psychometrician now for about 10 years, originally with a large testing company, focused a lot on cognitive ability testing, and I moved into the certification and licensure area. Also a lead psychometric assessor for the American National Standards Institute, specifically focused on ISO 17024. And currently my firm helps a host of different sizes and different venues, different industries, which is always interesting, of certification organizations around the world, everything from test development to operational maintenance and operational validity, as well as, of course, now making the switch to the adventuresome remote proctoring. So that's where I am.
Excellent. So I feel as though I've got two very, very, very knowledgeable people who are experts in this area. So I think we should get some really good questions. So just a reminder to everyone listening, please do ask some questions on this as we go through. So I suppose it's a bit of an obvious question, this one, but it's a nice one to kind of warm up with. So following all these recent events, have you both seen a bit of a kind of change in the industry regarding remote technologies? You know, not so much about remote proctoring, but generally, you know, have we seen much of a change? Amanda, do you want to kind of jump in there first?
Sure. Personally, we've had a lot of clients who originally were kind of a little bit hesitant, or else maybe their boards or some of their candidates they thought were not ready for remote proctoring, and now all of a sudden they're sort of being forced into exploring that avenue. I've always been a big fan of it. I think it's kind of the wave of the future. I think it's efficient. I think it's flexible. I think it's affordable. I think it's secure. But what's interesting, at least in the States and in North America, is that our two main accrediting bodies, ANSI, which of course is global, and NCCA, which is a little bit more focused in North America, are both now, ANSI has been on board with remote proctoring for a while. And I'm seeing some expedited application processes come out of ANSI right now to kind of adapt to this process that's happening right now. And then NCCA has also come out and said, okay, I think we're going to allow it temporarily. We'll see what happens. They're still piloting, trying to figure some things out. But I think as a whole, everybody is kind of like, this is now the time to kind of figure out if we can pull this off or not. And I think most of them are finding that they can. So
yeah. Excellent. So there's been definitely a mood change. Janet, what about yourself? Have you seen it? I assume you've now gone remote as well in terms of your working practice.
Yeah, so I think we've probably followed the rest of the UK, been all working from home for the last 2.5 weeks, really. And I think without a doubt, there's been a massive change in remote technologies. You know, remote invigilation aside, I think everyone, we're all using Zoom and various technologies to keep in touch. And I think, luckily for us, we'll come into this in a bit more detail, but we've already gone to online invigilation. So I don't have to go through that pain process now. And we're so happy to be in that position, But I think it's such a brilliant time, obviously all the awful side effects of the virus aside, it's going to be a really different world we're going to live in 3 to 6 months time, I think, because this is just going to be the catalyst we need, I think, to start moving into remote technologies across the board.
I think you're absolutely right. I think everyone's been talking about this kind of this idea of technology, but there've been people have been very fixed on the idea of we have to have a physical location, physical activity, and I think this has really changed things quite a lot. So, just in terms of your activities with online invigilation, online proctoring, could you just kind of explain where you are with your use of the technology?
Yeah, so we moved into online invigilation in 2016, so we've been using it for quite a while. But obviously we moved across to BTL in 2018, so we've been with you guys for coming up for 2 years now. We basically deliver exams in around 80 countries around the world. We have roughly 5,000 students sitting our exams over the course of a year. Our exams at the moment are session-based, so we sit in specific windows across the year. Although we're thinking about moving to an on-demand model, which will be interesting. But we use 2 methods of delivery for online proctoring. We use the record and review, which is where the exam is recorded and then reviewed by a group of experts post the exam to highlight any issues or things that students may have done or violated, which is then sent to us, and we review that and decide whether to take further action or not. Or we use the live proctoring, where obviously an invigilator is watching. I think they do sort of maximum 10 people at a time on their screen. They'll monitor and also be looking out for the same things, anything odd, dodgy, that looks suspicious, and flag them either at that time or later. And so we've been using that model for 2 years now. And I mean, apart from a few sort of teething issues at the beginning, it's running really smoothly, and it's been a great process for us to have gone into.
Yeah, and it's excellent that you have been kind of pioneers in it, even before you came to us as well. You've been exploring this for quite some time. I think if for the listeners and watchers, there is a fantastic podcast that was done recently with Legge from your team, which looked at in a bit more detail as to the overall usage of Surpass and the technology. So I would invite anyone who's interested in finding a bit more about that in a bit more detail. Then if you have a search for a Surpass assessment community podcast, you'll find that and a load of other amazing podcast material as well. So so why did you choose to start delivering assessments via remote, online proctoring? What was the kind of catalyst for yourselves?
I'm predominantly cost. We're not a large organisation, and yet we're a global organisation. We are the only Treasury professional body that delivers qualifications. And as I mentioned at the start, we've got students in about 90 countries around the world. And we just couldn't afford to host them in test centres. You've got one student in the middle of a small town in Australia wanting to take our qualifications. It just wasn't feasible for us. So cost was a massive impact. And deciding factor in why we moved across.
Okay. And in terms of the candidates, and what's their kind of been reaction to using this process, this approach?
Well, that's probably, I don't know if you've got enough time to cover all of that, but I think initially very challenging. You're going to go through the whole sort of people don't want to take responsibility for their own equipment. They just want to go and sit in a test center. Someone else takes responsibility. They arrive and then they leave. So it's sort of getting that mindset changed where people actually aren't scared of the technology, because I think that's the problem. People think, oh my gosh, I've got to set up my own laptop, I've got to make sure I've got enough broadband and do all of these settings, and there's a bit of a fear factor there because they're feeling like they're taking it all on themselves. So it's all about sort of getting them along that journey with you, communicating with them, making sure they're clear on what's required. I think for us as well, wherever you are in the journey, you've always got a challenge with people that are midway, the transitioners, the ones that are going either from paper to online or online in a test center to online remote invigilated. They'll be your hardest sell, really. Whereas now we've been doing it for a few years, so actually we've got people that have started the journey with us online, and they're absolutely fine. So so it's just making sure that as well you're delivering it to the right, or you're communicating with them at the right level, and being there to be supportive for them and understanding the stress, because they are all very stressed. They're stressed anyway, but I think the technology adds another level. Suddenly they can't remember how to disable a pop-up blocker or close down Chrome or whatever. So it's just sort of that, making sure you're aware of people's experiences, their level of technological capability, and where they are in that journey.
And I think you're right about the fact that people, they fear change in a way, don't they? We all naturally do that a little bit. Some people get excited by the prospect and embrace it. Other people, that they don't really want to face it really. So having the if they're used to two different types of models, the kind of traditional model, then they are going to be in a position where it's going to be awkward for them potentially. But those that are new to it, and I suppose we talk about it with kids at school and using technology in the classroom. They're quite familiar from an early age, so it just becomes part of a normal way of working, doesn't it? We've had a question in, and I think we're going to cover this in a bit more detail, but questions about what the kind of teething issues to start with. I think were they kind of more about the communication approaches to candidates?
Yes, I mean, I've got a few sort of key tips that I wanted to talk about at the end, but one of them is around sort of consistency of your message, but also your own team being familiar with the software, the process, the product. Because I think if your team aren't consistent in their message, able to support the students, that adds so much more fear. If the students are dialing in and they can hear that actually the person on the other side of the phone doesn't really get it either, then then you sort of lost the battle before you've even started. So definitely making sure your communication is the same every single time. So get the process right, know what you're doing, and then just stick to it. But also using different ways of communicating the message. We've done videos, we've used different social media forms. We've gone from sort of long 2-page emails of step-by-step to short bite-sized bits of information on social media. So, don't be afraid to be varied in your approach of how you get the message across.
So we can explore that a bit later, because I do have some questions about that. But obviously, if people want to ask some more on those, I've got a few questions coming in, but we'll just carry on for the moment. And then, so in terms of the current pandemic impact, has that had much of an impact on you? Are you in a position where it is business as usual?
I feel bad actually being able to say that. Very small, low levels of impact for us. It's very much on the people side. We have an exam session coming up in 3 weeks, and for us it is completely business as usual in terms of the preparation. I think what we're dealing with now is people worrying about sitting at home with their children around them, whether they've got the space, the mental room to take the exam. Obviously, if people might be affected by their illness itself, but also working pressures. So for me, I'm like I said, it feels awful to say it's BAU for us, but I am very pleased to be able to say that, because I wouldn't like the alternative. But it's more on the human side now that we have to be a bit flexible.
Yeah, and I've noticed it, and I think all my colleagues have noticed it. It's not so bad when you're working from home, when the kids aren't around and things like that, but it is harder. It's strange, I've seen more cats this week than I think I've ever seen in my entire working career.
That's from our calls.
I love them. So how difficult was it for you to start delivering your exams with online proctoring? How when you started, was it hard one to win across at people?
Another one that sort of brings back some scary reminders of how it was. But I mean, I think we've got different levels of challenge. So obviously for a number of organizations or professional membership bodies, if there are any of you out there listening, you've got to get your council on board, you've got to get your executive panel on board. And actually sometimes that's harder than the students themselves. They might not be experienced with technology. They might be nervous about it as well. And, you know, to be very open with issues at the ACT, you know, we had a few issues before we'd moved to BTL, and, you know, they were impacting reputation. So, you know, there is a risk to this delivery. I'm not going to say it's all easygoing and, you know, there's nothing really to worry about it, jump into it, because if it does go wrong, you know, that's your reputation on the line. That, you know, get your approval internally, get your stakeholders on board, get the support around you, I think is key to get going. In terms of once we sort of started rolling it out, as I sort of mentioned before, you've got the issues around students not wanting to take responsibility for their own equipment. For those of you that have seen the Proctor exam demonstration, you'll know that you need a mobile device as well, whether it's a phone or a tablet. When we did that, we had some people phoning up going, oh, I don't have a smartphone, I don't have a tablet. And, you know, you feel a bit bad, but at the end of the day, we did sort of go, well, there's a really great offer at Argos for £30. You know, it gives you a basic smartphone, go and get it, because we can't do it any other way. So, you've got those people that are a bit resistant on the technology side. They don't sort of want to buy into that or you know, invest in it. Student stress, as I had mentioned before, they're all panicking normally, so their logical brains go out the window when it's exam time. Countries and locations around the world. So as I mentioned, we've got students in about 90 countries. And I think what you do have is different challenges in different countries. So be aware of where you are offering your exams, and I think work with BTL or your provider to understand if there are differences in different areas around the world. There are, you know, you've got Middle East challenges, you've got challenges in China, and then in places like Africa, you've got very different ways of working where most people, even if they're really poor, have excellent mobile data, but you know, Wi-Fi at home is like a no-no, not going to happen. So, you know, have that awareness of where you are working and offering the solution.
Yeah, you're right. In some countries, the kind of infrastructure is leapfrogged, hasn't it? We've seen, we've had phones, here in England for quite a long time. There's the phone network, and that actually brings with it its own kind of issues with broadband. Whereas, Africa, and I remember seeing when I was out in Cambodia, a monk with a smartphone. There are countries who are making those big leaps. Do you think, in light of COVID-19, do you think it would, if you were doing this now, obviously it's quite good that you're not, but do you think there would be some difference, kind of different opinions internally to you starting off this now? But do you think it would have been a slightly easier win?
Oh my gosh, without a doubt. I'm almost jealous, I think, because I do think now there's that stimulus, there's that absolute realization of what you need. And I think the impact of not being able, people are cancelling exams. I know other awarding bodies are cancelling their exams. They're not even looking at alternative ways of doing it. They're just going to wait it out. And you kind of go, well, is that the right approach? Because eventually, longer term, we can sort of put this off for as long as we want, but eventually it's going to go online. It's going to go, down this road. And I think, I would just use this time right now to be brave and to push forward with something like this.
And I suppose just in light of that, there's one question here. What do you think the risks are of bringing remote invigilation in too quickly? Do you think there are some risks around that? Is it the standard?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, when we did it, we went big bang. We did it all in one go, and it was pretty horrendous and painful. I think one of the things I haven't mentioned yet is also the impact on your own team. So a lot of people do this change and think, well, it's going to take stuff. It's going to stop us doing X, and therefore we're going to have all this time. We're going to be able to do other things. It doesn't necessarily take away from your process. There are different things that you need to do, different activities you need to do. You might need different skill sets in your team, so you need to be aware of that. I think the technological side of it, you need to make sure people in your team are comfortable in that space. And whereas they may be more comfortable doing sort of test centers, this might be very different. So there are lots of things to think about. There is a risk if you go big bang and do it all too quickly, that there will be problems. But I do think, obviously, BTL, you guys have been working with me on this for 2 years now. I think the support, the understanding we have around the service is brilliant, which will obviously mean that you can give that support to your other customers that want to take this up, which will be of huge benefit, because I think there's nothing worse than when you're sort of trying to stagger through this and make it work. But also, sometimes if you do go a bit big bang, you get it all over and done with.
So ripping the plaster, the band-aid off, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. I'm probably more of a rip the plaster off kind of girl, but than take it slow. But obviously people are different. So go with what works for you, your organization, your stakeholders, your students.
I think, like you say, there's a lot of knowledge within BTL on this side of things. So I think just for people to lean on the team as much as possible would be great. So Amanda, let's just turn to yourself a second. So you've been working on standards and activities out in the US. What's this kind of status what's the status of the standards, and what's the status of remote proctoring out in North America?
May I say one thing before I answer this one? I didn't want to interrupt Janet, but I was thinking while she was talking about making the transition that we've seen something like this happen before. So when I was in grad school and a little bit before that, we were making the transition from paper and pencil to computer-based. And a lot of the same concerns were happening then. A lot of the same, do I have the ability to use a computer? Am I comfortable? Is this going to cause more test anxiety? Do I have is my computer lab going to have the same type of technology that somebody else is? Is there going to be test bias based on the digital divide? And I think I always saw this as being sort of a parallel to that process, but I think that COVID-19 is just going to make a bigger leap and it's going to happen faster. But I do see remote proctoring is not going anywhere. So I think that it is time to rip off the Band-Aid, because I think 2 years down the line, you'll wish that you had done it when all of this was happening, and you just have to have that support system. So sorry, I just wanted to say that because I was thinking about the P&P, the CBT, which I'd done all sorts of research on in grad school, and it's all the same type of comments that's happening. So.
I think your points are very valid. I know there's one particular one that I read from the regulators from this side about making sure that nobody is I forget the term that they use, but no learners kind of left without, I suppose, isn't it? Making sure that everyone comes with them. That's I suppose the important part. It is a challenge because not everyone has technology. I think when you're dealing with a professional level, I think it's slightly easier, I believe, because especially I'd imagine what people are doing this as part of their ongoing job prospects, so that they'll be in a position where they have technology and everyone has smartphones. But I do imagine if you're looking at other areas and other cultures, you might be facing some more challenges. So it's kind of remote proctoring is quite a big thing in the States, isn't it? There's quite a lot of activity going on with it in certainly the university levels. Is there much in terms of the professional level qualifications?
Yeah, I think so. I think that a lot of organizations have been kind of dancing around the idea and investigating it. And I've been seeing a lot of more movement at conferences, a lot more vendors that are now not just partnering with people, but they have their own booth, and people are, signing on with them left and right. And what a lot of organizations have been doing, which I am a fan of as a psychometrician, as a stats person, is they've been kind of launching a pilot program for remote proctoring and being able to compare the data from that pilot program to either their test center or their in-person proctoring data. And actually one of our clients was the first one to make it through the accreditation process while using remote proctoring. And I was able to, because they were still offering some in-person proctoring, being able to look at those stats and being able to reassure them, your passing rates are holding steady. There's no differential item functioning across the groups, all that kind of good nerdy kind of stuff that makes everybody feel better.
Stuff you love. Yeah,
but I think it's growing in the US. And as you said from your question, I'm on the technical working group, and it's a joint effort from academia and professional testing associations. And I think that we're nearing the end. We're in the review process and finalization process. I think there will probably be some things put in there due to the current situation that we didn't anticipate. So I think there'll be a final push, and I would expect the standard to come out probably this summer. And what's interesting is I'm the co-chair of the equivalency group. And so that's, again, speaks to my research area of looking at the differences in the equivalence of those modalities of testing. And it's just going to be able to give everybody kind of a standard to not necessarily be super prescriptive and tell you exactly what to do, but really a guidance document of what you should be looking for when you're doing your homework about your vendors, what you should be asking yourself when you're pulling data from different testing modalities to make sure that everything is working as it should. So I'm looking forward to the finalization happening. It's been a long process.
Well, these things are, I think what's interesting is that, in North America, you are going through that process. You're trying to prescribe it. I know the regulators in the UK take a slightly less of a hands-off position. They don't want to start stipulating on technologies. They don't want to give so much guidance. But I suppose what would be really beneficial for everyone from this is for everyone to look at that guidance that's coming out of the States, out to North America, and use it and apply it to their own particular situation. As long as they can justify themselves to their regulators, then that should be fine, I suppose. But it is. I wonder if it's. I worry that it might be the UK's regulators' position might be making some people hold off. I know, Janet, you're not regulated by Ofqual, are you? So it's been a little bit easier for you to kind of push this, but yeah, it's kind of different situations. So so Amanda, the next question is probably the answer is probably going to be no, but has any of the COVID-19 stuff really accelerated it? It's just going to carry on its own track, I suppose.
Yeah, not yet. I think I don't know about you, but in the last few weeks, I think everybody's just been sort of day to day trying to make things work and trying to figure out work from home and all of that stuff. So I think it's kind of been backburnered for a little bit. But I think that once we get back on track, I do think that it'll be an accelerated towards the end.
Yeah. Excellent.
We're almost there.
Okay, we're getting there. Yeah, we're getting there. So obviously one of the kind of main questions that kind of come up from this whole process is, and this is to both of you really, what would you say to anyone who has concerns about security in that? Now we've actually had some questions that kind of match this, so we'll try and pick some of these off while we're there. So in terms of people copying items as part of it, what measures are taken to prevent cheating from kind of gathering the question data? Janet, I think you do yours as a series-based exam process. Does that mean you're doing a new test every time? Is that the case?
Yes, so we have a new exam each session, but so even though if we have a session-based exam, our students can sit all over the world and they sit at the time local to them. So we might have students sitting the certificate in Treasury at 9:30 a.m. in Australia, which is 12 hours before the UK students sit. So there is that element of risk, but obviously with the recording and the screen sharing, because of all the elements that we have in terms of security, you can see, you've got the screen sharing, what shows you what they're doing on screen. You've got the webcam, which is like this, which shows you what's happening here. And then you've also got the mobile phone, which shows what they're doing on their desk. And so often what you'll find is that if people are misbehaving or even taking photos of items, so we did actually have one student, funny story, that was flagged because they were taking photos, and we thought, are they taking photos of the items? Actually, when we investigated further, he was taking a selfie of himself. So that is one of the funny sides to the remote invigilation, is you do get to see all sorts of interesting stuff on the videos. But the coverage that you get gives us a lot of security that people aren't, taking the items, aren't cheating. I mean, if they are, we have had a few people who've had to disqualify for us as well. If they are, if we identify them as potentially cheating, they may get struck off our membership board. We have an ethical code they need to abide by. So for our students, reputationally, it's a massive thing if we were to disqualify them and kick them out of the ACT. So that gives us a bit of a security from that side as well.
And Amanda, from a kind of psychometrician's point of view, what's your kind of thoughts on security? You know, obviously there's things like loft, etc., which could be employed. Would that be the kind of suggestion you would maybe go down?
It depends on the size of the program, right? So if
Yeah.
you want a loft or an adaptive test, you know, I'll have small programs who say, oh, we want an adaptive test. And I'm like, you know, you're talking about thousands of questions and thousands of people. And, you know, there's got to be other stopgaps put into place to protect your content. And I think what Janet pointed out, as far as the IT goes, especially with Surpass with the dual camera action, which is why it's really my favorite vendor at the current time. Shameless plug on the webinar,
That's
but
fine.
here it is.
Fine.
I think we both, I think it's obvious. But you know, the one thing with a little bit of a psych background that I speak to when I talk to people about switching from a live person proctor, either in a training center or in a test center, is the absolute removal of a relationship between the candidate and the proctor. There is no that proctor that is watching you take a test could not care less whether or not you pass or fail. So there is no sort of, oh, they're in my industry, or oh, they took my class. Oh, I've sat on this committee with this person. I might want to help them a little bit, or let them take some materials to the test center, or whatever it is. That whole human aspect of cheating, and which is huge in some cultures, is just absolutely removed. It's just taken off the table. So if that's been a problem for you in the past, especially with a global program, remote proctoring, you might really see your pass rates kind of be much more in control just because of that human aspect.
You think you're right in terms of the test center kind of environment. It is, if it's a professional test center where someone turns up and they've had absolutely no connection with it at all, there's a lot of security measures in there. But I think, like Janet says, yourself, how you look at how you present, your questions, the items that you deliver, but then having all these other tasks, kind of security measures around you can really help aid the process of identifying test fraud, can't it? It's all information that builds up. One question that's coming here is are there any, do you find higher levels of malpractice for remote proctoring in general? I don't know, Janet, is that something that you've seen? Have you seen an increase in cheating, or do you just think that you're actually finding people that might have been cheating through other measures in standard practice?
That is a hard one in a way. We have seen a few more recently, but I don't know if that's just to do with a bad bunch, or if it's because we're being a bit more rigorous. But I think what what we were sort of saying earlier is that actually with it being online, it's almost like a one-to-one relationship with that student. You are watching. I think it's better than people in a test center or whatever, because you've got one-to-many. And on this situation, it's being reviewed so many times by different people that, and people forget they're being recorded. So their bad behavior will come out. If it's going to happen, it will, because an hour in, they've forgotten they're being recorded. And you do start to notice when they are doing things. So yes, it's probably more visible to us now than it would have been in the past, which isn't a bad thing.
I'd
rather know.
Yeah, exactly. It's better to know, isn't it? So in terms of the live and recorded, so obviously live is where someone's watching you take the test straight away, and recorded is someone's watching it play back at speed and seeing repetition of movement. Have you got a particular preference on that at the moment? Which one do you prefer?
Not particularly. I mean, we tend to go for live invigilation when we're doing longer exams. So our exams go up to 4 hours. So we tend to do our 3 hour plus using live invigilators. Anything under that, we use the record and review. I mean, both work. They're as good as each other in different ways. Obviously, the record and review, then often you might get more work because everything's reviewed by the review team, and then it comes to you and it's given in sort of a RAG status, red, amber, green. Now, obviously, they are flagging anything that's hit a violation tick list, so that could be something as, small as, well, they could see someone had a tablet next to them, one thing, and then that would maybe be amber, which then means my team will have to go through and we check all those videos and thoroughly make sure. And sometimes for us, it's common sense. We go, actually, nothing odd's going on here.
Yeah.
You know, but rightly, the invigilators flagged it for us to make that decision, because it's not their call to make. So, but both situations, I think, works for us. It's what you're more comfortable with, perhaps, as well.
And I think the bonus of having that camera, second camera, it helps to not only, I suppose, eliminate the people who are cheating, but also eliminate genuine mistakes, or if they looked away or they moved out of camera shot. If you've only got that one view, then you would never know what they did. Whereas the other camera can actually show that they leaned over to do something.
Yeah. I think
innocent.
Yeah. Just to jump in there, sorry, but that for us, I think we love that element of it. It's one of the best things changing providers, to have that third view, because so much happens on the keyboard.
Yeah.
And you can't even see my hands on the camera right now. You wouldn't know what I'm doing. Whereas the phone gives you that. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And Amanda, in terms of the stateside, I know there's a kind of bit of a preference towards live invigilated examinations. Do you think, if having that second camera, do you think that would actually maybe relax some people's concerns about security?
I don't know yet. I mean, I think it's kind of like a baby step issue. And to me, ANSI was the lead as far as saying, yes, we're going to accredit programs that are using remote proctoring as long as they meet all of these things. As of right now, record and review is not one of those options. So as of right now, live proctoring is the way to go. And I think I would like to say yes. I think in the future, I've seen the stats on it. I've seen the examples. I've seen the clients who do both and their numbers and their reactions to it, like Janet's. And I think in the future, yes, we will get there. But I think right now, it's kind of like, let's just bite off a little bit at each time. So we get approval, we get everybody on board, we get all the stakeholders, the candidates, everybody comfortable with one, and then maybe we'll get to that. And I could see some pilot programs running, just like some people right now of my clients and others who are doing the both in person, or not anymore, but we're doing in person and remote proctoring, and being able to compare those stats. I could see that in the future, being able to compare the stats between live proctoring and record and review. What do the security incident logs look like from both of those processes? So I think I see it as progressive.
Yeah. So it's taking it's small steps, isn't it? Okay, so there is one other kind of question which does lead into this next question about data privacy, but there was a question about toilet breaks. People always ask this, is a popular question. I completely get it. What do you do about toilet breaks, Janet?
Especially for 3-hour plus exam.
Yeah, and it is funny because toilet breaks are like students' number one question as well. So we ban them. Brutal, I know. No, look, we say toilet breaks are not allowed unless they're doing the 4-hour exam, and then they're allowed one toilet break. However, at the end of the day, if it is record or review or even live invigilated, you can't stop someone getting up and going out and coming back in if they need to. And sometimes if they are live invigilated, they'll message the invigilator and say, I'm just going to the toilet. But obviously any break, if a student leaves the room or the camera, those are all flagged. And so you will get them on your incident report anyway. And fair enough, they might be gone for 2 minutes, don't know what they're doing in the toilet, but we kind of go with 2 minutes is probably not enough for them, certainly for our exams, to get a huge amount of information to cheat. But it is flagged, and I think if you get people who are perpetually leaving the room, up to you what you want to do with that. If you want to disqualify them because they've left the room, you set the rules of how harsh and unrealistic or you want to be.
I had a sorry, I'm going to interrupt really quickly. I had a client who was using one of the larger testing center networks and had discovered that the test center, anyway, somehow they discovered that somebody had stuck a smartphone up into the paper towel dispenser in the bathroom. So even though you had to lock your cell phone away, on the little personal lockers, when you log in, they say, oh, I have to go to the bathroom. And of course, the bathroom break was allowed because it was a 4-hour exam. They had gone in and could access this smartphone that was in the bathroom. So my response to how to handle those types of things is that if they are determined they will find a way, no matter,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, those incidents are rare, but they will occur on either side of the argument of who your proctor should be. So yeah.
Well, to me, I think there's the element of what are you testing and how are you testing? Because if you've got a full multiple choice, where someone could take away the answer options and transmit those, and you go into another space to kind of remember the ABCs, etc. There are options about putting breaks within the test, aren't there? So you could say, up to this point, you can't go back. This is a break. You can't go back now and answer any of this stuff. So you don't know what's coming because you've not seen the questions. So I suppose what you're doing is having the opportunity to swat up, really, I suppose, on some of the stuff, but you don't necessarily know the questions that are coming. You can't go back and change them anyway. So I think there are approaches and ways around that. And like you say, it's just a judgment call, isn't it, really, as to how you handle that. Just in terms of data privacy, then, because obviously, people are showing their IDs, etc. That's been recorded. You're in their own personal space, just like we are now here. Your space is slightly more lived in than my white walled, being decorated bedroom. So do you think there are any concerns about data privacy? Is there anything that either of you have come across in that sense? Maybe Amanda, do you go first?
Sure. This is a tougher question because I usually deal with test content security, but I feel for candidate information, at least, especially according to ANSI standards and 17024, there are a ton of things put into place to protect candidate information. So obviously, if you are shopping around for a vendor, these are the types of questions that you want to ask them. How is this data prepared? How long are you going to keep the data? When is it going to be destroyed? How is it going to be destroyed? All of those questions. Some of the vendors are ISO certified for security, which is great. And as far as the candidate information, as your internal policies go, you've got to make sure that you're following up. And if there are ever any incidences, that you have both your corrective actions, your preventive actions, all of that kind of stuff. But I don't know that there's a huge ton of difference across proctoring modalities with data privacy. I think it's there either way as an issue. And the one thing that I would say about personal things being in the background and et cetera, is that some of the onus of remote proctoring is placed onto the candidate. So they need to have very strict instructions before they sign up. And we've helped our clients develop that of what they need to be responsible for, not only with their technology, but as well as their surroundings and what are they planning? Is their daughter going to walk into the room? All of that kind of stuff. Yeah. So they have to take some of that responsibility onto themselves when they're setting up their testing session.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the kind of standard common sense activities. And then I suppose, Janet, you've been through this yourself in terms of bringing a vendor on board. It's about doing your own security due diligence, isn't it? GDPR, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also contractual. I think you do get into conversations though around things like ID. So for us, none of the invigilators see the ID, so that's all captured right up front, and then that data, they can't see that at all. We're the only ones that can actually view the ID data, and the review team to check that that person is who they say they are. But for all of us, the videos, footage, ID, all of that is stored for a maximum 6 months, and we've set that because obviously, as people know with GDPR, you have to prove that you need it for that length of time. For us, that gives us enough time to go through an appeals process if a student needed to appeal it and close that down. So for us, we've set it at maximum 6 months. As soon as 6 months is hit, everything's wiped. And so it is, it's about sort of what works for you, adhering to GDPR rules, making sure you have that conversation with your suppliers. And I mean, everyone, we've had a few people, actually just a good point though to say is if people can ask for certain sets of data, as you know, so you have to provide, if they do ask for it, you'd have to provide the chat logs. They are allowed to see the video footage. They can have all of that. So be mindful of that as well, because it is their data. And then just to say what Amanda mentioned about what's in their background, completely up to them, but also they need to know that, they've been told there shouldn't be things on there. It needs to be a clear environment. they shouldn't have anything around them. So
and that goes back to communication again. I mean, you make the switch and that's fine. You get everybody on board, and your communication has to be key and consistent to your candidates, your stakeholders, your board members, and your internal team as to how we're going to approach this so that nobody has any questions.
Yeah, no, it's all valid stuff. So, yeah, and people are right to be concerned, aren't they? But there are ways to kind of address it. So what would you say to anyone who's concerned about their regulator's position in online proctoring? And just to kind of add this in, we've got a question. Can you please provide some examples of how to justify the process to regulatory agencies? Do you think, well, I suppose it's North America, Amanda, you've talked about the kind of the standards that people are working towards. Is there anything else that people can do to justify their kind of decision to move down this route?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think that they need to make a justification anymore. I mean, I think the current situation with the pandemic is the justification. ANSI has come out with, which is the global regulator, has come out with an expedited process to be able for accredited bodies who already are accredited, but they've been using test centers or whatever to very quickly get a process through to approve this new method of testing. And ANSI sees the need for that, and they're moving forward with that. And I believe NCCA has had some communication about something similar as well. So I don't know that you really even have to make a justification anymore. And I think that this is another reason why to make a tiny silver lining out of all of this, which is still horrific, but to be able to use this as the catalyst to get you across that hurdle. Yeah, but I don't know about off-call.
Okay, Jana, anything you to add there in terms of regulatory?
I mean, I think I agree with Amanda. I think now's the time to use it to your advantage. We're lucky enough we're not regulated, so I haven't had to have those uncomfortable conversations. And certainly I know it is a big worry for people generally at other conferences I've spoken at. They come up to me and go, oh, but you're not regulated, so you don't have to jump through the hoops we do. But I do think now's the time. Be brave, have those conversations. They can't really turn around now and say no. Or I think validly come up with some reason why it's not feasible.
Yeah,
and I don't think it's going to go back to normal anytime soon. And so I think that people who might be waiting, we're going to wait it out, we're going to just pause it for a few months. I had a couple clients who said that a while ago, and now they're like, this is we can't pause for this long. There's just no way. And I also think that even further in the future, I think that everybody's going to kind of expect that there's this remote technology aspect to life now, and everybody is going to be like, why can't I take it as a remote proctor? Like, why don't you offer that? I think it's going to start to be expected, actually.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, like I said, my communications with the UK regulator or the England regulator, Ofqual, they're open to people talking to them, communicating with them. So I think, go to your regulator and ask them about this. I think they're going to be perfectly understanding. Well, I would hope they're perfectly understanding that the situation has changed, and business as usual needs to carry on. And you're right, Amanda. There's nothing. This isn't going to end itself in the next few weeks. This is going to have a big impact for the next 12 months, potentially longer. So, okay, we're coming towards the end. I've just got a couple of questions then about tips, really, and then we'll try and we've had loads of questions today, so this is fantastic. So what tips would you give to someone ready to take the next steps into online proctoring? Janet, particularly, I suppose communication has come through. What kind of things would you suggest that over and above what you've said?
I've kind of got 4 tips that I scribbled down earlier. So the first one is communication. I mentioned before about consistency of the message, using different media ways of getting that message out. We've got to understand that people have differing levels. You've got to try and make it accessible, but also be open, be transparent. Don't feel that you need to sort of hide some of the detail around this. I think the more open you are with your students, the better they respond to it. Let them challenge you. It might be wise to do, whatever method you have in terms of getting bulk messages out there, communicating as frequently as you can, and giving them room to feedback as well. Don't be afraid to hear what they think, because I do think if you try and sort of just throw it on them and let them sort of sink or swim, it doesn't go down particularly well. So, you might feel like you're bending over a little bit backwards at times for them, but I think it's worth it in the long run. So, communication is key, but also use, we do little sort of pop-ups on social media as we're heading towards exam week, things to think about, short, accessible, snappy, but it's always the same message. Each one is the same thing. We don't change the language. When we're telling people, make sure you've got the latest version of Chrome, that's all we say. We don't, you don't fluff it up into something else that it needs to be. Have the latest version of Chrome. You can only use Chrome. That's it. Don't try and explain why or whatever. Just keep it simple.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think my other one was familiarization. Like I said before, get your team familiar. Let them know what they're talking about. They've got to be confident. If they're not confident, your students won't be confident. I think prepare for the worst.
Okay.
Would be my third one. Prepare for the worst, but expect the best. It will throw up things that you haven't thought about. No matter how well you prepare, you will come across a situation which you thought, oh my word, what? Oh, how do we deal with this? But be positive. And I think right now is the time to be brave. So, I would say rip the plaster off. But it does, I do want to say people are worried about it, but it does work. I have gone through for the last 12 months now exam sessions which have been, I want to say flawless, but pretty much, not one complaint from a student, not one issue, not one, crying student. And we have had students crying on the phone to us before. And it really does work when you go for it. And I think you've just got to, like I said, prepare for the worst, but hope for the best, and it should be fine.
Excellent. And there's, I was thinking the other day, we've got some footage of what they've used in our promotional materials, and I think if anyone's looking for some quick footage of examinations in process as part of their communications, then please do get in touch. I'm sure we can find a way to share that out as well. And you're absolutely right about being consistent with your message, but also being very clear in it and not fluffing it up. So thank you for those tips. Are excellent. Amanda, in terms of North America, what would be your kind of tips? Any kind of final suggestions from yourself?
I don't know that so I just have two, and I don't know if they're solely to North America, but the one thing I would say is do your homework. And as much as I like the Surpass system and love the dual camera system, there are so many other things that you need to consider when you are trying to figure out which of the vendors you're going to use for your remote proctoring system. One is, how well does it work with your test delivery system and your item banking system? And what we usually do for our clients is we'll put together kind of a cost research spreadsheet, and it has all the things that are important to them. And then we cross-reference them with the different vendors so they can make an educated choice. It's not always going to be necessarily about cost. It might also be about how quickly they can provide on-demand scheduling, or are they doing session-based? How many people do they watch at a time? All of those sorts of parameters all need to be researched so that you can make a good decision. You don't regret it later. The second tip would be to have a data plan. And that would be so that when you have some people who are on your board, or a candidate comes up 3 months later and they're just, they appeal their score, their decision, and of course they will, because somebody's going to fail. And they say, well, I didn't like remote proctoring and I think it was unfair, and, et cetera, et cetera. So have a plan in mind of how you're going to examine your data after you've rolled out your remote proctoring to be able to prove the equivalence to the test as it was administered previously. And so I think you need to plan out sort of your own little research study, and whether or not you're going to publish it, or it's going to be internal or a white paper or whatever, or just used to talk to the candidates when they have a problem, or that one board member who was like, I still don't like this way. Then you can say, yeah, but look, here's what's going on. I'm going to prove to you that it's really okay. And I guarantee you it's going to turn out to be okay. I have not had it turn out any other way yet. So put that plan into place so that you can really demonstrate to people that it's working just as well.
That's some excellent advice and tips there. I think one thing, I'm just going to bring in one of our colleagues, Sam, just to add into there we go. Just so we can help us with answering some of these questions. Sam, are you there? Can you hear us?
Hello.
There
Hi.
we go. Excellent. I'm going to work through these questions now, but the one tip I would kind of suggest for anyone is a technique called pre-mortem, which apparently is a NASA thing where they basically look at something and say, well, what actually, let's pretend it all went wrong. We tried to land a man on the moon and it crashed and crashed and burned. Taking that slightly glum look at the process and picking off all the bits, and like you say, get yourselves everything a plan in action then, so you're almost preparing yourself for the worst. And like Janet said, you can expect the best then from the whole process. So that would be my tip. Right, so let's just have a quick skim through some of these questions. I had lots of questions about toilets. I hope nobody was asking me to go to the toilet during the webinar. We'll be quick on this, so you can go if you do want to. So there was one question about a secure client and web delivery. I believe with the ACT test, the Association of Corporate Treasurers test, that's done through the web delivery apart from Sam or Janet. Is that something? Excellent.
Mm-hmm. Yep, correct.
Okay. And I suppose when people were saying about people worried about people scraping items or copying items, with the session-based approach, that would actually help with that, and also with the dual cameras do as well. So a question here, what are the pass rates like? So Janet, I don't know, is that something you have any kind of insight? Has it changed your pass rate approach, or is it business as usual?
Not significantly. We haven't noticed a massive improvement in pass rate, but it's quite hard for us to measure that because we actually changed our qualifications at the same time that we went online. So we moved from a modular approach to a sort of pathway. So we don't really have like for like, unfortunately. But I mean, year on year and session by session, they remain pretty consistent. And we've had the odd session where suddenly the pass rate's really low or really high, but we can't see any link to online invigilation having any impact on that. So it's either just the cohort or potentially an issue with the assessment itself.
Yeah, go on, Amanda.
I was going to say the one client that I had that went remote a long time ago, and we did extensive studies of their data when they did it, because they had maintained accreditation throughout, and that was sort of a new thing at the time. And their pass rates actually dropped when they were remote proctoring. And it was one reason why they had wanted to go with remote proctoring, because in certain areas of the world, they were having a really hard problem with the live proctors, non-robot proctors really helping the candidates pass the test, just from whether it was a cultural or a training or an association, or they knew the person, and the pass rates actually dropped, and they've held steady then. And so that's been really great for them to be able to control that, both the item exposure as well as just the unauthorized assistance.
Excellent. So for recorded approach, how long would it take for the reviewing? Sorry, how long would it take to review the recordings and determine inappropriate behaviour stroke violations? How many reviewers would typically look at one candidate's test session? So either maybe Sam or Janet there. How many? So let's just take that first bit. Second bit. How many people look at the test session in terms of reviewing afterwards?
In a record and review process, it is one-on-one, so the review would monitor one exam at one time.
Okay, so they're not watching 6 or 10 exams play out.
No.
And that's done at speed playback, isn't it?
It is 6 times speed to capture any behaviour, especially in the face. If they're looking around the room, if anyone is there or there's something suspicious, it's been proven that speed captures that happening.
Okay, and so when we say about how long it would take, well, it's actually 6 times faster to watch back a recorded session then. Let's just have a look. I think we've covered over the other one. Preferred proctoring method, we've done that one. Janet, you mentioned about key issues with professional bodies. I think you mentioned this earlier. Was that just in relation to regulators, do you think?
I need to remember what I said.
What were the key issues with professional bodies? I think you just mentioned professional bodies in there. Maybe we can have a listen back on the playback, and I can get back to the person on that if there's anything particular, or if the person involved would like to send through a bit more details, what they can, clarification, that would help. I think that's about it. It's just a lot of toilet questions. So before we all need the toilet, I want to thank my guests today, Amanda and Janet. You've been fantastic. Thank you very much for your
having me.
Your insight.
Thank you.
And Sam, thank you for also being there for the technical questions. I think you got off lightly there.
I think I did.
So of course, if anyone wants any more information, there is a video available on the BTL and the surpass.com websites if you want to have a look at how our system works and a bit more information about the dual camera side of things. Obviously, get in touch with us if you want more details. My information is up there if you want to speak to me, as well as if you want to go direct to anyone else. But thank you very much. Really appreciate you tuning in, and we'll look forward to speaking to you all soon. So thank you, guests, and thank you, listeners. That's it from me. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye-bye.